On April 28, 1988, a short flight between two Hawaiian islands became one of the most haunting images in aviation history. Just 21 minutes after takeoff, at 24,000 feet, a deafening crack shattered the morning calm. A massive section of the Boeing 737's roof was ripped away, exposing passengers to the open sky as hurricane-force winds tore through the cabin. In the chaos, veteran flight attendant Clarabelle Lansing was pulled violently from the aircraft. She vanished into the blue and was never seen again. Explosive decompression isn't just failure. It's the moment a plane unravels and the sky itself swallows everything it wants. Welcome to Sky Investigations, where every torn fuselage and every black box holds a hidden story. Case number 1. Aloha Airlines Flight 243, 1988, Hawaii. On the afternoon of April 28, 1988, Hilo International Airport on the Big Island of Hawaii was alive with its usual hum of activity. Among the departing flights was Aloha Airlines Flight 243, a short inter-island hop bound for Honolulu. The aircraft was a Boeing 737-297, tail number N73711, nearly 19 years old and a veteran of island skies. It had logged more than 89,680 flight cycles, countless pressurizations and depressurizations over the years. On board this day were 95 souls, 89 passengers and 6 crew members, many commuting, some tourists, others simply traveling home. At the controls sat Captain Robert Schornsteimer, 44 years old, and First Officer Madeline Mimi Tompkins, just 36, sharp and capable. In the cabin, veteran flight attendant Clarabelle C.B. Lansing, 58, was beginning another routine day. For her, Aloha Airlines was family. She had spent decades walking the aisles of its Boeing 737s. No one on board could have imagined that this short hop, barely 35 minutes in the air, would become one of the most shocking accidents in aviation history. Flight 243 departed Hilo at 1:25 p.m., climbing smoothly into the clear Hawaiian sky. The weather was calm and visibility was excellent. Passengers settled in for what should have been a quick, uneventful journey across the islands. But just 21 minutes after takeoff, as the 737 leveled at 24,000 feet, disaster struck. At 1:46 p.m., a thunderous explosion ripped through the forward cabin. In an instant, an 18-foot, 5.5-meter section of the fuselage roof above the first-class cabin tore away. The force of the decompression was violent and absolute, a phenomenon known as explosive decompression. Passengers in the first row suddenly found themselves staring into the open sky. The cabin, once sealed and pressurized, had been transformed into a wind tunnel. Loose objects whipped into the void, oxygen masks dangled uselessly in the gale, and the roar of the atmosphere drowned every scream. At the forward galley, Clarabelle Lansing was on duty. In a fraction of a second, the explosive rush of air caught her. She was hurled out of the aircraft, vanishing into the blue above the Pacific. Her body was never recovered. Inside the cabin, chaos reigned. The sudden decompression injured dozens. The hurricane-force winds tore at clothing, skin, and hair. Passengers clung to their seats in terror, many bleeding from lacerations caused by flying debris. The flight crew, stunned but alive, struggled to regain their bearings. Captain Schornsteimer and First Officer Tompkins faced a cockpit that was still intact, but the aircraft was vibrating violently. The control yokes shook in their hands and alarms screamed across the instrument panel. They had no time to think of Lansing. She was gone in an instant. Their job now was to save the remaining 94 people on board. First Officer Tompkins, though younger and less experienced, rose to the moment. She immediately took the controls while the captain managed radios and checklists as best he could, but communication was nearly impossible. The open fuselage howled with the force of a jet engine, drowning every word. Oxygen masks had deployed, but the aircraft was too high for passengers to breathe unassisted. Tompkins shoved the nose down, initiating an emergency descent. The 737 plunged toward breathable air as the Maui coastline grew larger in the distance. In the cabin, flight attendants crawled across the floor to reach passengers. They shouted instructions, secured seatbelts, and tried to calm the terrified. But above their heads, the blue Hawaiian sky still gaped where the roof had once been. Despite the battering winds and failing structure, Captain Schornsteimer and First Officer Tompkins managed to line up with Kahului Airport on Maui. They had less than 15 minutes from the moment of decompression to bring the crippled jet down. As the aircraft approached the runway, passengers braced for impact. The control surfaces felt heavy. The fuselage shuddered with every movement. But somehow, through skill and sheer determination, Tompkins brought the jet down. At 1:58 p.m., about 12 minutes after the roof tore away, Aloha Flight 243 slammed onto the runway in Maui. The landing was hard but controlled. Tires screeched, smoke billowed, and finally the aircraft ground to a halt. Passengers erupted in tears of relief. They had survived the unthinkable, a convertible jet at 24,000 feet. The toll was heavy, but astonishingly not catastrophic. One fatality. Flight attendant Clarabelle Lansing swept into the sky. 65 injured, 8 seriously. 65 survivors walked away with their lives. The fact that the aircraft had held together long enough to reach Maui was itself a miracle. Photographs of the Boeing 737 on the tarmac, its roof peeled back like the lid of a tin can, shocked the world. The National Transportation Safety Board launched a full investigation. What they found was a chilling testament to the dangers of aging aircraft. The 737 involved was nearly 2 decades old and had flown almost 90,000 flight cycles. Every cycle, pressurizing at altitude, then depressurizing at landing, had placed stress on the fuselage joints. Investigators discovered multiple fatigue cracks in the lap joints along the upper fuselage where thin aluminum skin panels were riveted together. Years of exposure to Hawaii's humid, salty air had accelerated corrosion. Over time, microscopic cracks grew. On April 28, 1988, they joined together, and the roof tore away. The NTSB's conclusion was damning. Structural failure due to metal fatigue and corrosion. Inadequate maintenance inspections failed to catch the cracks in time. The design of the Boeing 737 lap joints made them especially vulnerable to multi-site fatigue damage. The accident reverberated across the aviation world. The image of Aloha's 737, its fuselage ripped open, seats exposed to the sky, became an enduring symbol of the dangers of explosive decompression. The FAA issued urgent airworthiness directives requiring airlines to inspect aging aircraft more rigorously, especially those with high flight cycles. New non-destructive testing techniques, like ultrasonic and eddy current inspections, were mandated to detect hidden cracks. Case number 2, United Airlines Flight 811, 1989, Pacific. On the night of February 24, 1989, Honolulu International Airport was buzzing with long-haul departures bound across the Pacific. Among them was United Airlines Flight 811, a scheduled service from Honolulu to Auckland, New Zealand, with an onward leg to Sydney. The aircraft was a Boeing 747-122, registration N4713U, a wide-body giant that had served United's fleet for nearly 2 decades. On this flight, there were 337 passengers and 18 crew members. Many were bound for vacations, some for business, and others were military personnel returning to duty. At the controls sat Captain David Cronin, 59 years old, just weeks away from retirement. With more than 28,000 flight hours, he was one of United's most experienced aviators. Alongside him were First Officer Gregory Slater and Flight Engineer Randall Thomas. a seasoned crew for what should have been a routine overnight flight across the Pacific. But just minutes after departure, Flight 811 would become the scene of one of the most terrifying decompression accidents in history. At 1:52 a.m. local time, the Boeing 747 lifted off from Honolulu, climbing into the darkness of the Pacific night. The weather was calm, the climb steady. At around 22,000 feet, just 10 minutes after departure, the unthinkable happened. Without warning, the forward starboard cargo door blew outward. The massive door, nearly 9 by 10 feet in size, tore away from the fuselage with explosive force. The result was catastrophic. A gaping 10 by 15-foot hole ripped open in the side of the jumbo jet, just beneath the first class and business class cabins. The pressurized air inside blasted out into the void, dragging with it anything or anyone in its path. 9 passengers, seated near rows 8 and 9, were sucked out of the cabin, disappearing into the black waters of the Pacific Ocean below. Their bodies were never recovered. Inside the aircraft, chaos erupted. The decompression tore away sections of the cabin floor, severed electrical wiring, and damaged 2 of the plane's right side engines. Oxygen masks deployed as the cabin plunged into darkness. Passengers screamed, clutching their seats as freezing air and deafening noise filled the cabin. In the cockpit, Captain Cronin and his crew faced a nightmare scenario. Warning lights flashed across the panel, multiple system failures, cabin depressurization, and the loss of engine number 3 as debris from the door was ingested. A short time later, engine number 4 also flamed out. The 747 had lost nearly half its power on the right wing. The flight engineer reported damage to hydraulics and electrical systems. The aircraft shuddered violently as air screamed through the fuselage tear. Despite the chaos, Cronin's decades of experience guided him. He immediately initiated an emergency descent, pushing the aircraft down toward 10,000 feet, where passengers and crew could breathe without supplemental oxygen. He then declared an emergency and turned back toward Honolulu. The massive jumbo jet, still carrying over 300 lives, had become a crippled shell, but it was still flying. Meanwhile, in the passenger cabin, the scene was one of horror and disbelief. Those seated near the hole were gone, dragged into the night. Passengers further away clutched each other, certain they would be next. Flight attendants, battered by the blast of decompression, crawled down the aisles to check on passengers, administer oxygen, and calm the terrified. Several sustained injuries, but they refused to abandon their duties. The gaping wound in the fuselage exposed wiring and insulation. The stench of jet fuel and the vibration of damaged engines added to the fear. Yet, amid the chaos, the crew's professionalism helped keep panic from consuming the cabin. For Captain Cronin, the approach back into Honolulu was among the most harrowing of his career. The aircraft was heavy with fuel, 2 engines gone, and its aerodynamics badly compromised by the torn fuselage. Yet after just 22 minutes in the air, Cronin and his crew brought the stricken jumbo jet onto the runway at Honolulu International Airport. The touchdown was firm but controlled. Fire trucks and emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft as it rolled to a stop. Passengers, dazed and weeping, were evacuated down emergency slides. Incredibly, out of 355 people on board, 346 survived. 9 lives were lost. Those seated nearest the cargo door when it blew open. Photographs of the damaged 747 on the tarmac, a jagged hole torn in its side, seats exposed to the night air, shocked the world. The NTSB investigation initially faced challenges. Boeing suggested that improper maintenance had caused the cargo door to fail, but survivors and investigators were not convinced. The cargo door of early 747s used an outward opening design. Unlike plug-type doors, which become more secure under pressure, outward opening doors relied on an intricate system of latches and locking mechanisms to stay shut. The NTSB's inquiry revealed that in Flight 811's case, the locking mechanism had malfunctioned, likely due to a short circuit that caused the door's latch motors to rotate uncommanded. The result? The door opened outward while the plane was still pressurized, leading to explosive decompression. This was not the first warning. Previous incidents with 747 cargo doors had been reported in the 1970s, but design modifications were only partially implemented. Flight 811 proved the danger was real and deadly. The final report concluded the forward cargo door design was flawed. Electrical problems could lead to uncommanded opening. Boeing's earlier modifications were insufficient. The aftermath of Flight 811 was profound. Boeing was forced to redesign the cargo door latching system on all 747s and later wide bodies. Airlines worldwide were ordered to conduct immediate inspections and modifications. For the survivors, the scars were lasting. Families of the 9 lost passengers mourned lives ripped away in seconds. Survivors described the haunting silence of empty seats where friends and strangers had sat only moments before. Captain Cronin, hailed as a hero, completed the flight as one of his last before retirement. His calm under pressure ensured that hundreds survived what could easily have been a total loss. Case number 3. Delta Airlines Flight 1288, 1996, Florida. On the hot summer afternoon of July 6, 1996, Pensacola Regional Airport in Florida was filled with the familiar sounds of commercial jets roaring down the runway. Among them was Delta Airlines Flight 1288, a short-haul service bound for Atlanta, Georgia. The aircraft was a McDonnell Douglas MD-88, registration N927XZA, one of Delta's workhorses for domestic routes. That day, 148 passengers and 6 crew members boarded the jet, expecting nothing more than a routine flight of just over an hour. At the controls sat Captain John Cameron, 56 years old, and First Officer David Smith, 43, both seasoned pilots with thousands of hours on the MD-80 series. Their crew prepared the cabin for departure as the jet taxied into position on runway 17. But as the aircraft accelerated for takeoff, what should have been an ordinary departure turned into one of the most violent and tragic accidents ever witnessed at the airport. At 2:23 p.m., Flight 1288 began its takeoff roll. The engines spooled up with their usual thunderous roar, propelling the MD-88 down the tarmac. Passengers braced against their seats as the aircraft gathered speed. Then, without warning, a deafening explosion erupted from the left engine, number 1. In an instant, shrapnel from the engine's disintegrating fan hub blasted outward at supersonic speed. A massive piece of metal tore through the left side of the fuselage, ripping into the passenger cabin. One of the fragments struck row 37, blasting open a window. The sudden decompression violently sucked a passenger seated by the window, 29-year-old Marcia Brown, partially out of the aircraft. She died instantly. Another passenger seated nearby also suffered fatal injuries from the shrapnel impact. The cabin filled with screams as debris and wind tore through the rows. In the cockpit, the explosion was unmistakable. Warning lights illuminated across the instrument panel as vibrations shook the jet. Without hesitation, Captain Cameron and First Officer Smith aborted the takeoff. They applied maximum braking force and deployed thrust reversers on the remaining engine. The MD-88 screeched and shuddered as the pilots fought to bring it to a halt on the runway. Flames licked at the damaged engine as smoke trailed behind the slowing jet. Within seconds, air traffic controllers declared an emergency. Fire crews raced across the tarmac, converging on the crippled aircraft. Inside the cabin, flight attendants ordered passengers to remain seated as the smell of burning fuel spread. Despite the terror, the crew maintained order until the aircraft finally ground to a stop. The fire was quickly suppressed, preventing the disaster from escalating further. But for the Brown family, the tragedy had already struck. For survivors seated near the rear of the aircraft, the scene was almost incomprehensible. A hole gaped where a window had been only moments before. Blood and debris marked the seats. The violent noise of the failed engine echoed through the fuselage. Yet, against all odds, the structure of the MD-88 held. Aside from the 2 fatalities, several passengers suffered injuries from flying shrapnel and the abrupt stop, but most survived. Passengers later described the ordeal as surreal. One moment an ordinary takeoff, the next a battlefield inside a commercial jetliner. The National Transportation Safety Board quickly launched an inquiry. Investigators recovered the shattered remains of the Pratt & Whitney JT8D-2-19 engine's fan hub. Their analysis revealed the cause, a fatigue crack that had slowly grown undetected within the hub. The crack originated from a metallurgical flaw and had propagated over time through repeated stress. Critically, investigators discovered that Delta's maintenance inspections had failed to detect the flaw. The hub had been subjected to ultrasonic inspections, but the crack had been missed. Whether due to human error in the testing process or limitations in the inspection technique, the result was the same: a catastrophic failure. The NTSB concluded the immediate cause was the fracture of the left engine's fan hub due to fatigue cracking. The contributing factor was the failure of maintenance inspections to identify the crack during routine checks. The tragedy of Flight 1288 sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. The FAA ordered urgent inspections of all Pratt & Whitney JT8D engines in service. Airlines were required to use improved, non-destructive testing methods, including advanced ultrasonic techniques, to identify hidden cracks before they could propagate. Delta, along with Pratt & Whitney, was forced to overhaul its maintenance protocols. Inspectors were retrained, inspection intervals shortened, and more rigorous standards imposed on engine fan hubs across the industry. For the families of Marcia and Virginia Brond, the changes came too late. Their loss became a rallying cry for stronger oversight of aging engine components. Captain Cameron and his crew were commended for their swift response, which likely saved dozens, if not hundreds, of lives. By aborting the takeoff and stopping the aircraft before it left the runway, they prevented a catastrophic mid-air failure. Investigation and analysis. When the dust settled after each of these shocking accidents, the focus shifted from survival to understanding. Investigators faced the same haunting question: what exactly went wrong, and how could it happen again? The National Transportation Safety Board immediately dispatched investigators to Maui. The wreckage told a terrifying story. An 18-foot section of the upper fuselage had been ripped away, leaving the aircraft looking like a convertible car. Initial suspicion centered on structural fatigue. To confirm, investigators meticulously examined the lap joints, the riveted seams where aluminum skin panels overlapped. Under magnification, they discovered a network of microscopic fatigue cracks. Years of repeated pressurization cycles, more than 89,000 in this case, had weakened the joints. Compounding the problem was Hawaii's salty, humid climate, which had accelerated corrosion. Routine maintenance had not detected the cracks, partly because visual inspections were insufficient to spot such tiny flaws. The NTSB concluded that the structural failure was caused by metal fatigue and corrosion, leading to explosive decompression. In response, the FAA issued emergency airworthiness directives requiring enhanced inspection of high-cycle aircraft, especially those flying short island routes. The Aloha accident marked the beginning of a global push to reevaluate how aging airplanes were monitored and maintained. For Flight 811, the investigation was far more complex. The cargo door, which had torn open at 22,000 feet, was recovered from the ocean weeks later. Boeing initially suggested maintenance error, claiming the door may not have been latched correctly. But survivors and investigators doubted this explanation. The NTSB conducted extensive testing of the door's locking mechanism. Their findings were alarming. The 747's outward opening cargo door design was vulnerable. Electrical shorts could cause the latch motors to rotate unexpectedly, leading to what investigators called uncommanded opening. This meant that even if the crew believed the door was properly shut, it could still blow open in flight. The investigation also uncovered that similar incidents had occurred on other 747s in the 1970s, though with less catastrophic outcomes. Boeing had introduced modifications, but they were not comprehensive enough to eliminate the risk. In its final report, the NTSB concluded that the design of the cargo door latching system was flawed. The explosive decompression of Flight 811 was not a maintenance oversight, but a fundamental design vulnerability. As a result, Boeing was forced to redesign the cargo door systems on all 747s and other wide-body models. The FAA issued airworthiness directives mandating immediate inspections and modifications across fleets worldwide. The NTSB's investigation into Delta Flight 1288 centered on the Pratt & Whitney JT8D engine. The failed engine was dismantled, and the remains of the fan hub were sent for metallurgical analysis. Examiners found a fatigue crack that had originated deep within the hub. Over time, with every rotation of the engine, the crack propagated until the hub catastrophically fractured during takeoff. What alarmed investigators was that the hub had recently undergone ultrasonic inspection, a procedure meant to detect internal flaws. Yet the crack had gone undetected. This suggested either human error in conducting the test or that the inspection technology itself was inadequate. The NTSB determined that the fan hub failure due to fatigue cracking was the primary cause, with inspection deficiencies as a contributing factor. Following the findings, the FAA ordered immediate ultrasonic re-inspection of all JT8D engines in service. Pratt & Whitney introduced new procedures, and inspection intervals were shortened to prevent similar failures. Delta also revised its maintenance protocols to ensure stricter quality control. Though the causes differed, fatigue cracks in a fuselage, a flawed cargo door design, and an engine hub fracture, each investigation pointed to the same outcome: a sudden loss of cabin integrity with deadly consequences. These official inquiries not only identified the failures, but also drove sweeping regulatory changes. The aging aircraft program, focusing on high-cycle jets, was launched after Aloha 243. Cargo door redesigns were implemented after United 811. Stricter engine inspections became standard after Delta 1288. In each case, the investigations transformed tragedy into action, reshaping safety protocols across commercial aviation. Each of these investigations sent shockwaves through the aviation world, and none ended with a final report gathering dust. They triggered urgent industry-wide change. After Aloha Flight 243, the FAA launched the Aging Aircraft Program, requiring airlines to track not just flight hours, but the far more punishing number of pressurization cycles. Inspections of lap joints and fuselage skins became mandatory, with new non-destructive testing methods like ultrasonic and eddy current scanning. Following United Flight 811, Boeing was forced into a massive redesign of its cargo door latching systems. The FAA issued airworthiness directives that grounded aircraft until modifications were complete. Airlines had to inspect wiring and replace latching mechanisms fleet-wide. The lesson was brutal but undeniable. No outward-opening cargo door could be trusted without multiple redundant safeguards. And after Delta Flight 1288, Pratt & Whitney reworked inspection protocols for its JT8D engines, and the FAA required airlines to immediately retest hubs already in service. Maintenance crews underwent retraining, and the industry began relying on more sophisticated ultrasonic inspection tools to catch microscopic cracks before they spread. Together, these responses reshaped the regulatory landscape. What began as 3 horrifying accidents became the driving force behind stronger safety standards, rules still protecting passengers every time they step on board today. Safety lessons from Hawaii to the Pacific to Florida, these 3 accidents all drove home the same sobering truth. In aviation, no detail is ever too small. First, no crack, no bolt, no flaw can be ignored. A hairline fracture in a fuselage joint, an electrical glitch in a cargo door, a microscopic defect in an engine hub, each proved capable of unleashing forces powerful enough to tear steel apart and claim lives in an instant. The lesson is clear. Safety depends on vigilance down to the tiniest part. Second, aircraft must embody fail-safe design. Flight 811 showed the danger of relying on a single latch system to secure a massive cargo door. When that one system failed, lives were lost. Modern aviation safety insists on redundancy. If one layer fails, another must still hold. It is not enough to hope a system works. Every system must assume failure and still protect those on board. Third, survival often rests on the crew. In all three cases, the difference between mass death and survival came down to training, composure, and leadership in the cockpit and cabin. At Aloha 243, Captain Schornsteimer and First Officer Tompkins wrestled a torn-apart jet to the ground. At United 811, Captain Cronin and his team saved more than 300 lives by nursing a crippled 747 back to Honolulu. At Delta 1288, decisive action by Captain Cameron and his first officer stopped the MD-88 before it could take off and fail in midair. These tragedies remind us that aviation safety is not a single wall of defense. It is a layered shield, built on design, maintenance, and human skill. When one layer fails, the others must stand. And ultimately, the greatest safeguard may be the quiet professionalism of the people at the controls, men and women trained to face the unthinkable and to give passengers their only chance of walking away. As the final scenes fade, we face a chilling contrast. The sky above, serene, endless, eternal, yet hiding forces strong enough to tear steel apart in seconds. From Hawaii to the Pacific to Florida, three tragedies revealed the same truth. A fuselage weakened by fatigue, a cargo door whose design betrayed trust, an engine hub hiding a fatal crack. Each flaw opened the door to chaos. Each turned a routine into a nightmare. When a plane loses its skin, the sky itself becomes deadly. If you want to uncover more hidden stories behind aviation's darkest moments, subscribe to Sky Investigations, because the black box is just the beginning.